Are you completely out of your mind, Jake? Get down from there right this second. I paused. My right foot was on the fourth rung of a wobbly aluminum extension ladder. My left hand was white-knuckling the aluminum gutter, and my right hand was holding a single square piece of asphalt roofing. I looked down, squinting against the blinding noon sun. Standing directly on my freshly cut Bermuda grass was Brenda. Brenda was 5'2" of pure, concentrated suburban terror. She wore a matching pastel pink tennis skirt and polo shirt, a visor that said, "Live, Laugh, Love" in rhinestone lettering. And she was clutching a silver metal clipboard to her chest, like it was a holy relic. She was the president of the Oak Creek Homeowners Association here in Cary, North Carolina, and she was currently staring at me like I had just punted a puppy into a storm drain. "Good morning, Brenda," I said. I forced a smile that I knew looked more like a grimace. "Beautiful day, isn't it? Very low humidity for August." "Do not play cute with me, Jake," she snapped. She aggressively tapped a manicured fingernail against her clipboard. The sound was like a woodpecker made of acrylic. "I know exactly what you are holding in your hand. And I know for a fact that the Architectural Review Committee explicitly denied your application for that specific roofing material yesterday at 4:30 p.m. "Brenda, my roof is leaking," I said slowly, trying to project my voice down without losing my balance. "Water is actively bypassing the underlayment. Last night it rained, and a very steady drip landed directly on my mint condition Absolute Edition of Batman, The Long Halloween. We are past the point of committee reviews. We are in the realm of emergency triage. Your comics are not my concern. The aesthetic continuity of Oak Creek is my concern," she shot back, not missing a single beat. "Your application requested the color Sahara Beige. The approved color palette for Phase 3 homes is desert sand. You were informed of this." I stared at her. I slowly lowered the shingle, holding it out so the sun caught the gritty surface. "Brenda, look at this shingle. Look at it with your eyes. It is sand-colored. It is beige. Sahara beige and desert sand are literally the exact same color. They are just manufactured by two different companies. One was at Home Depot, and one is back-ordered for 6 months from some specialty supplier in Ohio." "They are not the same color," she said, her voice dropping an octave into a tone usually reserved for scolding toddlers. "Are you telling me, Brenda, that this shingle is too tan for this neighborhood?" I asked, leaning down a little further, my voice rising in pitch. "Is there a color wheel test to live here? Did I miss the Pantone color matching portion of the closing documents?" "Desert sand has warm undertones," Brenda stated, crossing her arms. "Sahara beige has cool undertones. In the golden hour lighting, the discrepancy will clash horribly with the stucco on the Henderson's house across the street. It is non-compliant." I took a deep breath. I looked at the Henderson's house. It was a hideous shade of salmon. Then I looked back down at Brenda. "I am replacing the roof, Brenda. I'm doing it today." Brenda unclipped a hot pink piece of paper from her metal board. She marched up to my front door and slapped it against the glass, securing it with a piece of blue painter's tape she materialized from her pocket. "That is a $500 fine, Jake, for initiating unauthorized exterior modifications," she yelled up at me, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "And it accrues daily. Every 24 hours that non-compliant roof remains on your property, another $500 will be added to your ledger, plus administrative fees, plus interest. You're fining me for fixing a hole in my house? I am fining you for disrespecting the charter," she yelled back, already turning on her heel. She marched back toward the street where her pristine, blindingly white Lexus SUV was parked, blocking half of my driveway. "We have rules for a reason. Prepare for a lien, Jake." She didn't get in the car. She just stood next to it, arms crossed, effectively standing guard. I climbed down the ladder, my boots hitting the driveway just as a massive shadow blocked out the sun. A Ford F-350 dually, coated in a thick layer of red Carolina clay, and pulling a flatbed trailer stacked high with bundles of Sahara beige shingles, turned onto my street. The diesel engine rumbled so loudly I could feel it in my molars. Behind the wheel was Big Mike. Big Mike was my roofing contractor. He was 6'4", weighed easily 300 pounds, had a beard that looked like it housed a family of small birds, and he did not care about Brenda's clipboard. He was a man who ate nails for breakfast and shat construction code. He pulled the truck up to my driveway, the air brakes hissing violently. But he couldn't pull in. Brenda's Lexus was parked horizontally across the apron of my driveway. Mike rolled down the window. He rested a forearm the size of a canned ham on the door frame. "Morning, Jake," he hollered over the engine. "Got the materials, got the crew coming in 10. "Morning, Mike," I yelled back, walking toward the street. Mike looked down at Brenda. Brenda looked up at Mike. She did not flinch. "Excuse me, ma'am," Mike said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone. "Gonna need you to back that little toy car up about 10 feet so I can back this rig in?" "You are not bringing those materials onto this property," Brenda announced, holding up her clipboard like a shield. "This project has been red-tagged by the Oak Creek HOA. Mike blinked. He looked at me. "Jake, you got a permit from the city?" "Pulled it yesterday, Mike. Completely legal," I said, pulling the folded white piece of paper from my back pocket and waving it. Mike looked back at Brenda. "Lady, the city says we can roof. The homeowner says we can roof. Move the car." "This is private property," Brenda shrieked. "The streets are maintained by the HOA. I am the president. I am issuing a stop work order." "Lady, I don't work for the HOA," Mike laughed. It was a hearty, terrifying sound. "I work for the guy with the checkbook. Now you can move the car, or I can just slowly back up and see if my hitch fits through your radiator. Your call." Brenda gasped. It was a loud, dramatic inhalation of air. She fumbled in her pocket, pulled out her cell phone, and aggressively punched the screen. "I am calling the Cary Police Department. This is vehicular assault. This is trespassing. You are both going to jail." "Take your time," Mike said, throwing the truck in park and cutting the engine. He opened the door, stepped out, and stretched his massive frame. "I get paid by the hour anyway." We waited. Mike leaned against the fender of his truck, casually eating a powdered donut he pulled from the cab. I stood in my driveway, watching the hot pink fine flutter against my front door in the breeze. Brenda paced back and forth on the sidewalk, glaring at us and speaking frantically into her phone, occasionally pointing violently in our direction. 10 minutes later, a white Ford Explorer with the Cary Police Department logo rolled down the street. It pulled up behind Mike's trailer, lights flashing lazily. 2 officers stepped out. One was older, graying at the temples, looking like he was counting the days to retirement. The other was young, probably right out of the academy, looking entirely too alert. "Officers, finally!" Brenda practically sprinted toward them. "Thank God. I need this man arrested for making terroristic threats, and I need this homeowner cited for violating a municipal stop work order." The older officer sighed. It was a heavy, soul-deep sigh. He adjusted his duty belt and walked over. "Morning, folks. Let's bring the volume down a bit. What seems to be the issue here?" "He threatened to run over my vehicle," Brenda yelled, pointing a manicured finger at Mike. The officer looked at Mike. Mike was halfway through a second donut. "Is that true, sir?" the cop asked. "I told her if she didn't move her car blocking a public right-of-way so I could access my job site, my trailer hitch might accidentally introduce itself to her grill," Mike said calmly. "Physics, officer. Big truck, little car." The young cop snorted, then quickly coughed to cover it up. The older cop looked at the setup. He looked at the white Lexus parked diagonally across the curb cut. He looked at Brenda. "Ma'am, is that your vehicle?" "Yes, it is." "You can't park like that. You're blocking a driveway and you're parked more than 12 inches from the curb. I could ticket you for that." Brenda's jaw dropped. "Are you insane? I am the HOA president. I am enforcing the covenants." "Ma'am, the covenants are a civil matter," the older cop said, his tone perfectly flat. "We are the police. We enforce criminal law and traffic law. Are these gentlemen stealing the roof? No. Are they assaulting you? He threatened my car. Did he hit your car? No. Okay then. Sir? The cop turned to me. Is this your house? Yes, officer. Just bought it 3 months ago. Do you have a city permit for the roof replacement? Right here, I said, handing him the paper. He glanced at it, nodded, and handed it back. He turned back to Brenda. Ma'am, he has a permit. The city says he can put a roof on his house. The color of the shingles is an issue between him, you, and a civil judge. I suggest you move your vehicle, or I will write you a citation for obstructing traffic, and then I will call a tow truck to move it for you. Brenda looked like she was going to spontaneously combust. Her face went from pale to pink to a deep, mottled crimson. She looked at the cops, she looked at Mike, and she looked at me. This isn't over, Jake, she hissed. You have no idea what you have just done. I'm going to bleed you dry. Have a nice day, Brenda, I smiled. She stomped over to her Lexus, got in, slammed the door, and threw it in reverse. She peeled out, burning a tiny bit of rubber, and sped off down the street. The older cop watched her go. He shook his head. I hate HOAs, he muttered. All right, gentlemen, keep it safe up there. Call us if she comes back with a weapon. Appreciate it, officer, Mike grinned. The cops pulled away. Mike's crew arrived in 2 separate trucks a few minutes later, and the air was quickly filled with the sound of compressor hoses, nail guns, and heavy boots on plywood. By sunset, the Sahara beige roof was fully installed. It looked perfect. It did not clash with the Henderson salmon stucco, mostly because nothing could make that stucco look any worse. I felt a sense of victory as I paid Mike and watched his massive truck rumble out of the neighborhood. The leak was fixed. My comics were safe. I had stood up to the tyrant, but the victory was short-lived. The next morning, I opened my front door to grab the mail. Taped to the glass, right next to the hot pink slip from yesterday, was a bright yellow slip. Notice of escalation. I pulled it off and read the fine print. Brenda hadn't just added another $500 for the second day. The board had apparently held an emergency executive session at 9 p.m. the previous night. Because I had completed the non-compliant project, they were deeming it a permanent, malicious violation. The fine was no longer $500 a day. They had assessed a flat, punitive penalty of $5,000 for the unauthorized roof, plus a mandate that I hire an approved contractor to tear it off and replace it with desert sand within 14 days. If I did not comply, they would begin assessing $1,000 a week in penalties and initiate the process of placing a lien on my property. I stood on my porch, staring at the yellow paper. $5,000. A forced roof tear-off. A lien. They were going to try and take my house over a shade of beige. I crumpled the yellow paper in my fist. I walked back inside, locked the door, and walked straight to my home office. I sat down at my desk, booted up my computer, and cracked my knuckles. Brenda wanted a war over the rules. She wanted to use the legal power of the Homeowners Association to crush me. Fine. If she wanted to be a stickler for the rules, I was going to become an absolute scholar of them. I was going to read every single word of the governing documents of the Oak Creek Homeowners Association. I was going to find a loophole. I was going to find a missing signature, a misfiled form, a contradiction in the bylaws. I was going to find the fatal flaw in her little suburban dictatorship, and I was going to tear the whole thing down. I literally spent the next 3 days doing absolutely nothing but pacing around my house, drinking way too much black coffee, and glaring at that bright yellow piece of paper like it had personally insulted my mother. Honestly, I mean, $5,000? Plus a forced tear-off? I was oscillating wildly between blinding, white-hot rage and a low-grade, nauseating panic that settled right at the bottom of my stomach. Every time I looked out my front window at my beautiful, perfectly functional, non-leaking Sahara beige roof, I just felt my blood pressure spike to levels that I guess would make a cardiologist weep. I was literally trapped in a suburban nightmare, held hostage by a woman whose primary personality trait was aggressively enforcing the color palette of vinyl siding. I mean, I tried to rationalize it at first. I tried to think, like, maybe I could just ignore them. Maybe they would just get tired and go away. But a quick Google search on North Carolina HOA laws violently murdered that little fantasy. HOAs out here have teeth, like literal shark teeth. They can fine you, they can slap a lien on your mortgage, and if you ignore them long enough, they can literally foreclose on your house. Over a shingle. Over a shade of beige that is so similar to the approved sand color that you'd need a spectrometer and a degree in advanced optics to tell them apart. It was insane, but it was reality. I wasn't just fighting Brenda anymore. I was fighting the legal entity of the Oak Creek Homeowners Association, a corporate juggernaut of petty grievances armed with a blank checkbook for legal fees. So I decided if I was going to fight a legal entity, I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting. I needed the rule book, not the condensed, spiral-bound welcome to the neighborhood packet Brenda handed out with a basket of stale muffins, but the actual, original, legally binding covenants, the source code of her tyranny. That is how I found myself, on a disgustingly humid Tuesday morning, driving downtown to Raleigh to visit the Wake County Register of Deeds. Honestly, there is a specific type of depression that only exists inside municipal government buildings. It is like a tangible thing. You walk through the heavy glass doors, the metal detector beeps angrily at your belt buckle, and the air conditioning hits you with the smell of floor wax, old paper, and shattered dreams. The walls are always painted this soul-crushing shade of institutional beige, ironically, a shade Brenda would probably approve of. And the fluorescent lights hum at a frequency that just slowly scrambles your brain cells. I guess I was expecting some kind of grand library of records, but it was basically just a massive, windowless basement room filled with endless rows of metal filing cabinets and computer terminals that looked like they were running Windows 95. I walked up to the front counter. Behind a thick pane of smudged plexiglass sat a woman who looked like she had been employed there since the invention of the printing press. Her name tag, pinned slightly crooked on a faded floral cardigan, read Doris. Doris was currently staring at a computer monitor through glasses with lenses so thick they looked like the bottom of glass Coca-Cola bottles. She was pecking at the keyboard with her 2 index fingers. Just click, pause, click, pause, click. It was agonizing to watch. Literally, I felt myself aging just standing there. "Excuse me," I said, trying to project my voice through the little semicircle cutout in the plexiglass. "Hi there." Doris did not look up. She finished typing whatever word she was attempting to spell, which, at her current speed, I assumed was something incredibly complex like cat or thee, and then slowly rotated her chair to face me. She let out a long, wheezing sigh that conveyed exactly how deeply I was inconveniencing her existence just by standing in her airspace. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice sounded like 2 pieces of dry sandpaper rubbing together. "Yeah, honestly, I hope so," I said, leaning in. "I need to pull the original Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions for a subdivision in Cary, the Oak Creek neighborhood. Phase 3, specifically, if that matters." Doris stared at me. She didn't blink. I mean, like, I actively watched her eyes for a solid 10 seconds, and her eyelids did not move. It was deeply unsettling. "Do you have the book and page number?" she finally croaked. No," I said. "I just know it's Oak Creek in Cary, built around, I guess, 1988 or 1989. Can't we just search by the subdivision name? Doris let out another sigh, this one heavier, like she was carrying the weight of all recorded history on her shoulders. She slowly turned back to her computer. We can. It takes longer. Name? Oak Creek. I need your name, sir. For the request log. Jake Miller. She started typing. Click, click, click. I stood there, shifting my weight from one foot to the other. I checked my watch. 3 minutes had passed. She was still typing Miller. Okay, she rasped. Oak Creek, Cary. Let's see here. She hit the enter key with an unexpected amount of force. The ancient computer tower under her desk whirred loudly, sounding like a jet engine preparing for takeoff. We waited. And waited. I swear to God, I could hear the hard drive spinning and crying out in digital agony. Got a lot of Oak Creeks, Doris announced, not looking away from the screen. Oak Creek Estates, Oak Creek Villas, Oak Creek Manor, Oak Creek Townhomes. You need to be specific. Just Oak Creek, I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. Single-family homes, off of Kildare Farm Road. More two-finger typing. More waiting. I started looking around the room, trying to find anything to distract me from the glacial pace of this interaction. A man 2 counters down was arguing with a clerk about a property line dispute involving a very specific oak tree, and I briefly considered going over and offering to cut the tree down myself just to speed things up. Here it is, Doris finally said. Oak Creek Phase 1 through 4. Original covenants filed October 14th, 1988. Book 4592, page 112. Perfect, I said, feeling a genuine surge of adrenaline. That's it. Can I get a copy of that? It's 74 pages, she said deadpan. Copies are 25 cents a page. You want the whole thing or just the amendments? I want the whole thing, I said, pulling my wallet out. Every single page. I want the original, unadulterated 1988 text. I want to read the ancient scrolls, Doris. She did not appreciate the joke. She just slowly pushed a small piece of paper through the slot. Take this slip to Terminal 4. Print it out yourself. Bring it back here to pay. I took the slip and basically sprinted over to Terminal 4. It took me another 20 minutes to navigate the archaic database software, which looked like it was designed by someone who actively hated user interfaces. But I finally found the document. I hit print. The massive commercial laser printer in the corner groaned to life and started spitting out pages. I gathered the warm, fresh stack of paper, went back to Doris, paid my $18.50, and practically skipped out of the building. I grabbed lunch at some mediocre sandwich shop down the street, sitting in a booth by myself, and immediately cracked open the document. Honestly, reading legal documents from the late 80s is like trying to decipher an alien language translated by a very bored Victorian lawyer. It was incredibly dense. It was literally just wall-to-wall text, single-spaced, typed out on what looked like an original IBM Selectric typewriter. Every sentence was roughly 4 paragraphs long and contained at least 6 semicolons and an aggressive use of the word whereas. I spent the next 3 hours sitting in that booth, nursing a wildly overpriced iced tea, just dragging a yellow highlighter across the pages. I was looking for anything. A procedural error. A contradiction. A weird rule that I could use to leverage Brenda into backing off. At first it was just hilarious. I mean, the original 1988 rules for Oak Creek were completely unhinged. According to Section 4, Paragraph B, no resident was allowed to own a satellite dish larger than 24 inches in diameter, which I guess was a real problem back then. Section 7 explicitly forbade the keeping of livestock on the property, with the express exception of up to two domestic fowl, provided they are not roosters, kept solely for the purpose of personal egg consumption. I literally laughed out loud at that one. If Brenda tried to take my house, I was absolutely going to buy 2 chickens and let them loose in my front yard just out of spite. There were rules about the exact dimensions of mailboxes. rules prohibiting the parking of recreational vehicles, boats, or any carriage of unusual design. There was a whole page dedicated to the acceptable varieties of grass that could be planted in the front yard. It was a monument to micromanagement. But as I kept reading, the humor kind of faded, replaced by that heavy, sinking feeling again. The document was ironclad. The developer back in 1988 had hired some very expensive, very thorough lawyers. The Architectural Review Committee, the committee Brenda currently ruled with an iron fist, was given almost unlimited unilateral power to approve or deny any exterior modification to any home in the subdivision. The covenants explicitly stated that aesthetic harmony was the sole discretion of the committee. They didn't even need a good reason to deny you. They just had to say it didn't look right. And the penalty clauses were brutal. Fines, liens, foreclosure. It was all spelled out in terrifying, archaic black and white. I rubbed my eyes. I was on page 68. I had a headache behind my right temple that was pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I was running out of pages and I hadn't found a single silver bullet. No loopholes, no contradictions, just a really solid legal cage that I had voluntarily bought my way into. I flipped to the last few pages. These were the administrative sections. Boring stuff about how board meetings were to be conducted, quorum requirements, and proxy voting rules. I was skimming at this point, my brain just rejecting the legal jargon. And then, I saw it. It wasn't a loophole, not exactly. It was just a standard boilerplate legal clause buried at the very bottom of page 71, right before the notarized signature of the original developer. It was under the heading, Article 12, Incorporation and Governance. I read the paragraph. Then I read it again. Then I sat up straight, pulled my highlighter cap off with my teeth, and highlighted the entire section in bright, fluorescent yellow. The paragraph read, The Oak Creek Homeowners Association, herein referred to as the Association, shall be incorporated as a non-profit corporation under the laws of the state of North Carolina. The association shall be governed by its Articles of Incorporation, filed with the North Carolina Secretary of State, and its duly adopted bylaws. All powers, duties, and enforcement rights granted within this declaration are contingent upon the association maintaining valid and active corporate status with the state. I stared at the words, contingent upon maintaining valid and active corporate status. Honestly, I'm not a lawyer. I mean, I run a YouTube channel where I talk about people getting revenge on bad bosses and stupid bureaucrats. But I know enough about business to know that a corporation isn't just a magical entity that exists forever by default. It's a piece of paper. It's a legal fiction created by the state. And the state requires you to maintain that fiction. You have to file annual reports. You have to pay fees. If you don't do those things, the state can and will administrative dissolve your corporation. They basically take away your legal right to exist. If the Oak Creek HOA wasn't a valid, active corporation, then according to this very document, they had zero power to enforce anything. They couldn't fine me. They couldn't put a lien on my house. They were just a group of neighborhood busybodies playing dress-up. I grabbed my phone. I didn't even care that my iced tea was watered down to basically dirty tap water at this point. I opened up Safari and went straight to the North Carolina Secretary of State's website. My thumbs were actually shaking a little bit as I navigated to the business entity search page. I typed in Oak Creek Homeowners Association. The little loading wheel spun. It felt like it was spinning for an eternity. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Come on, come on, come on, the results page loaded. There were 3 different Oak Creek HOAs listed in various counties across the state. I scanned down to the one registered in Wake County. I clicked on the profile link. The page populated with the corporate data. Entity name, Oak Creek Homeowners Association. Income, entity type, nonprofit corporation. Formation date, October 20, 1988, registered agent. Brenda, last name redacted for my own sanity, but let's just call her Brenda the Tyrant. And then, right below the registered agent information, in bold, stark, beautiful black letters, was the status line. I actually gasped out loud in the middle of the sandwich shop. A woman at the next table holding a pastrami on rye gave me a very concerned look. But I didn't care. I literally wanted to jump up on the table and do a victory dance. I had found the nuke. I had found the absolute, undeniable, legally binding silver bullet that was going to turn Brenda's entire world upside down. I quickly took a screenshot on my phone, then took another one, just to be safe. I packed up my massive stack of papers, practically threw a $20 bill on the table to cover my tab, and bolted for the door. I needed to get home. I needed to get to my actual computer and do a deep dive into the corporate filings. I needed to build a dossier of destruction. The drive home was a blur. I don't even remember getting on the highway. My brain was just firing on all cylinders, piecing together the strategy. I was going to let her dig her own grave. I was going to let her escalate this as far as she wanted, let her put everything in writing, let her commit to the tyranny, and then I was going to drop this bombshell directly on her head in front of the entire neighborhood. I pulled into my driveway, slamming my truck into park. I glanced up at my brand new, perfectly installed, entirely illegal Sahara beige roof. It looked magnificent. It was a monument to defiance. I walked up to the front porch. The hot pink fine and the yellow escalation notice were still taped to the glass, fluttering pathetically in the afternoon breeze. But as I went to unlock the door, I noticed something else. Sticking out of my mailbox, which was precisely the legally mandated 42 inches from the curb, was a thick, rigid cardboard envelope. It had a bright green sticker on it. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. My stomach did a quick, familiar flip. I grabbed the envelope and ripped it open right there on the porch. Inside was 3 pages of heavy, cream-colored linen paper, the kind that costs entirely too much money and is exclusively used by high-end law firms to intimidate people. At the top of the page was an embossed logo for a law firm in downtown Raleigh. Smith, Harrison, and Vance, attorneys at law, representing the Oak Creek Homeowners Association. I scanned the document. It was a formal demand letter. The language was cold, precise, and utterly ruthless. They weren't messing around anymore. Brenda had actually gone to the lawyers. The letter outlined my egregious and willful violation of the architectural guidelines. It noted the installation of the non-compliant roof and my refusal to halt construction when ordered by the board president. Then I got to the second page. The financial breakdown. The $5,000 punitive fine stood. But that wasn't all. They had added an additional $2,500 in administrative legal fees for the cost of retaining the law firm and drafting this very letter. They had also added $1,000 for a compliance inspection fee, which I assume was just Brenda standing on my lawn yesterday taking photos with her iPad. And, as promised, they had begun assessing the $1,000 weekly non-compliance penalty. The total demand was for $9,500, payable immediately via certified cashier's check. But it was the final paragraph that made the blood drain from my face, completely overriding the high I had just experienced at the sandwich shop. Be advised that if the outstanding balance of $9,500 is not received in full by the offices of Smith, Harrison, and Vance within 14 calendar days of the receipt of this notice, and if a state-licensed contractor has not been engaged to remove the non-compliant roofing materials, the Oak Creek Homeowners Association will immediately initiate formal foreclosure proceedings against the property located at my address, pursuant to the authority granted in the Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. A lien will be recorded against the deed in Wake County, and a notice of sale will be published. Govern yourself accordingly. 14 days. Honestly, the sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. 14 days to pay them almost 10 grand and rip off a perfectly good roof, or they were going to legally steal my house and sell it on the courthouse steps. I walked inside, the heavy cream paper trembling slightly in my hand. The house was quiet. My cat, a fat orange tabby named Barnaby, meowed lazily from his spot on the couch, completely oblivious to the fact that we were currently 14 days away from being homeless. I sat down at the kitchen island, staring at the demand letter. The threat was real. Foreclosure is not a joke. In North Carolina, an HOA can initiate a non-judicial foreclosure incredibly fast. They don't even need to go before a judge. They just file the paperwork with the county clerk, put a notice in the newspaper, and auction your house off from under you to pay the fines. People lose their homes over unpaid dues and overgrown lawns all the time. It is a terrifying, predatory system. The lawyer's signature at the bottom of the page, a guy named Richard Vance, Escola, looked like a jagged little knife. I looked at the demand letter. Then I looked at my phone, where the screenshot of the Secretary of State's website was still pulled up on the screen. The tension in the room was suffocating. $10,000 on one hand, a dissolved corporate entity on the other. I had the nuke. I knew the secret. But executing this was going to require absolute precision. If I played this wrong, if I just called the lawyer and yelled about the corporate status, they might just quickly file the reinstatement paperwork with the state, pay a late fee, and retroactively validate all their actions. I couldn't give them a chance to fix it. I had to trap them. I had to let them walk all the way out onto the ice, wait for them to commit entirely, and then I had to smash the ice out from under them in a way they could never recover from. I needed a stage. I needed an audience. And looking at the bylaws I had just printed out, I knew exactly how to get one. According to Article 7, Section 3 of the bylaws, any homeowner facing a punitive fine exceeding $1,000 had the right to request a formal disciplinary hearing before the Board of Directors prior to the enforcement of any lien or foreclosure action. The hearing had to be held in an open session, allowing other neighborhood members to attend. I grabbed my laptop, opened a new email draft, and typed in Brenda's official HOA president email address. Subject: Formal request for hearing. Notice of foreclosure. Brenda, I am in receipt of the demand letter from Smith, Harrison, and Vance, dated August 10th. Pursuant to Article 7, Section 3 of our governing documents, I am formally requesting an open disciplinary hearing before the Board of Directors regarding the assessed fines and the threat of foreclosure. I request this hearing be scheduled within the next 10 days. I look forward to discussing this matter with the board. Regards, Jake. I hit send. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The trap was set. The timer was ticking down. The fines were sitting at almost 10 grand. A lawyer was actively preparing to steal my house, and I was holding a secret that was going to legally obliterate the Oak Creek Homeowners Association. Honestly, I was terrified. But mostly, I was just ready to watch Brenda's little empire burn to the ground. The reply from Brenda hit my inbox exactly 42 minutes after I sent my request. I honestly think she was sitting at her computer, just aggressively refreshing her email, waiting for me to blink. The subject line was simply, Formal request for hearing. Notice of foreclosure. and the body of the email was just as brief and completely devoid of any basic human warmth. She informed me that an emergency talk open disciplinary hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 p.m. sharp at the Oak Creek Community Clubhouse. She also CC'd Richard Vance, Esquerra, just to really drive home the point that they were bringing the heavy artillery. I mean, I had a week to prepare. 7 days of walking past Brenda's house on my evening runs, seeing her Lexus parked perfectly in her driveway, knowing that she was in there probably practicing her gavel-banging technique. I spent that week compiling my dossier. I literally felt like a crazy person connecting red strings on a corkboard. But I wanted this to be airtight. I went down to a FedEx office print shop because my crappy home inkjet printer wasn't going to convey the level of absolute doom I was preparing to unleash. I walked up to the counter and handed the kid working there a flash drive. I told him I needed 10 copies of the documents. But I didn't just want regular paper. I wanted them printed on heavy 32-pound glossy stock. I wanted them spiral-bound with clear plastic covers and thick black vinyl backing. I wanted these things to feel like a prop from a legal thriller. It cost me like $140, which I guess is a lot to spend on being petty. But holding those 10 heavy, perfectly bound dossiers in my hands gave me a level of dopamine I haven't felt since I was a child on Christmas morning. The front cover was a printed title page that I had designed myself. It just read, Oak Creek Homeowners Association, Inc. Corporate Status and Fiduciary Liability Report. It sounded incredibly boring, which was exactly the point. It was a Trojan horse made of legal jargon. When Thursday evening finally rolled around, the air in Cary was thick and humid, that kind of heavy southern heat that makes your clothes stick to your back the second you step outside. I took a shower, put on a clean, crisp button-down shirt, because if you're going to legally dismantle a neighborhood dictatorship, you should at least look presentable. Grabbed my stack of dossiers and walked the 3 blocks down to the community clubhouse. Honestly, the Oak Creek Community Clubhouse was exactly what you are picturing right now. It was this single-story brick building situated right next to the neighborhood pool. You walk in, and it immediately hits you with this very specific, deeply depressing smell. It's a mixture of industrial floor wax, stale coffee from a pot that hasn't been washed since the Obama administration, and the faint, underlying scent of pool chlorine. The main room had a drop ceiling with those fluorescent lights that buzz just loud enough to give you a migraine if you listen too closely, and the carpet was this hideous pattern of maroon and navy blue geometric shapes designed specifically to hide spilled fruit punch. I walked through the double glass doors at exactly 6:55 p.m., and the room was absolutely packed. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. Brenda had totally weaponized the neighborhood gossip mill. There were easily 30 people crammed into the rows of uncomfortable metal folding chairs. These were the nosy neighbors. The people who measure their grass with a ruler. The people who post passive-aggressive complaints on the Nextdoor app about someone leaving their trash cans out 3 minutes past the designated retrieval time. They were all here, murmuring in hushed tones, holding little styrofoam cups of awful coffee, waiting for a public execution. At the front of the room, behind a long folding table draped in a cheap plastic tablecloth, sat the board of directors. There were 5 of them, but let's be real, Brenda was the only one who mattered. She sat dead center. She was wearing a tailored navy blue blazer with shoulder pads that looked like they belonged in a 1980s corporate boardroom, and her hair was hairsprayed into a helmet of absolute authority. To her right sat an elderly man named Cary, who looked like he was actively falling asleep with his eyes open, and a hyper-vigilant woman named Susan, who was taking notes furiously on a legal pad before the meeting had even started. But it was the guy sitting at the far end of the table that caught my attention. He was in his late 40s, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my first car, a silk tie, and a Rolex that caught the fluorescent light every time he shifted his weight. He looked profoundly bored, typing away on a sleek silver laptop. This was clearly Richard Vance, SQA, the hired gun. The man who was currently billing the HOA, and by extension me, probably $400 an hour just to sit in this room that smelled like chlorine and despair. And right behind the board table, projected onto a pull-down screen on the wall, was a massive high-definition photograph of my house. Specifically, a zoomed-in shot of my new, glorious, Sahara beige roof. I walked down the center aisle. The murmuring in the room instantly died. 30 pairs of eyes followed me. I could literally feel the judgment radiating off them. I reached the front row, sat down in a metal folding chair directly across from Brenda, and placed my stack of dossiers neatly on the empty chair next to me. Brenda looked at me. She didn't smile. She reached out with her manicured hand, picked up a literal wooden gavel. I kid you not, she actually bought a gavel for this, and banged it twice on the plastic folding table. The sound cracked through the quiet room like a gunshot. "I call this emergency disciplinary hearing of the Oak Creek Homeowners Association to order," Brenda announced. Her voice was amplified by a small, screechy PA system sitting on the table. "Let the minutes reflect that it is 7:02 p.m. on Thursday, August 13th. The board is present. Legal counsel, Mr. Richard Vance, is present, and the homeowner in question, Mr. Jake Miller, is present." She paused, looking out over the crowd. She was loving this. She was absolutely bathing in the attention. "We are here tonight to address an egregious and willful violation of the Oak Creek Architectural Guidelines," Brenda continued, clicking a remote in her hand. The projector screen shifted to a new slide. It was a side-by-side comparison. On the left, a blurry photo of a desert sand shingle. On the right, a picture of my Sahara beige shingle. To the naked eye, on a crappy projector in a brightly lit room, they looked identical, like literally the exact same gray-brown blob of asphalt. "As you can all plainly see," Brenda said, gesturing to the screen with a laser pointer, "Mr. Miller has chosen to install a roofing material that violently clashes with the established aesthetic harmony of Phase 3. Despite a formal denial from the committee, despite a stop-work order, and despite direct, in-person verbal warnings from myself, Mr. Miller proceeded to deface his property, jeopardizing the property values of every single home in this subdivision." A low murmur of disapproval rippled through the crowd. The woman sitting behind me actually gasped, like I had painted a pentagram on my garage door in goat's blood. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, staring blankly at Brenda. "Furthermore," Brenda said, clicking to the next slide, this one was a spreadsheet, a very detailed, color-coded spreadsheet of my financial ruin. Due to the persistent and defiant nature of this violation, the fines have escalated. The board assessed a $5,000 punitive penalty. Mr. Miller has accrued an additional 14 days of daily non-compliance fines at $500 a day, totaling $7,000. Along with the administrative and legal fees associated with retaining Mr. Vance to initiate foreclosure proceedings, the total outstanding balance owed to the association, as of this minute, is exactly $15,500. Another gasp from the crowd. 15 grand in 2 weeks. It was pure, unadulterated extortion. Brenda set her laser pointer down. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, steepling her fingers together. She looked down at me with an expression of pure, unbridled triumph. She had me cornered, and she wanted everyone to watch her deliver the killing blow. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "you requested this hearing. The board, in its boundless generosity, has granted it. We are listening. Do you have anything to say in your defense before Mr. Vance files the lien against your deed tomorrow morning? And more importantly, how exactly do you plan on paying the $15,500 you owe this community?" The room was dead silent. You could literally hear the hum of the vending machine out in the hallway. Richard Vance, Esquire, stopped typing on his laptop and looked up at me, an amused smirk playing on his lips, waiting for the peasant to grovel. I took a slow, deep breath. I let it out. I picked up the stack of heavy, spiral-bound dossiers from the chair next to me. I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't act angry. I kept my face completely neutral, channeling every ounce of calm I could muster. I walked up to the folding table. I handed the first dossier to Cary, who blinked at it like it was a foreign object. I handed one to Susan. I handed one to the two other silent board members. I handed one directly to Richard Vance, who looked slightly confused but took it anyway. And finally, I placed one gently on the table right in front of Brenda. Then, I turned around and walked down the first aisle, handing out the remaining 5 copies to the nosiest-looking neighbors I could spot. I walked back to my chair, stood behind it, and rested my hands on the metal backrest. "I'd love to pay the fine, Brenda," I said. My voice was loud enough to carry to the back of the room without a microphone. "Truly, I brought my checkbook and everything, but as I was reviewing the documents, I ran into a bit of a logistical problem. I have a quick question." Brenda frowned, looking down at the heavy black folder in front of her. She didn't open it. She just glared at me. "What is your question, Jake? We are not here to play games." "Who exactly do I write the check to?" I asked. Brenda looked at me like I had suffered a traumatic brain injury. "To the Oak Creek Homeowners Association, obviously. It says it right on the demand letter." "Right. The Oak Creek Homeowners Association, Inc., I said, nodding slowly. "A non-profit corporation registered in the state of North Carolina. That is the entity attempting to collect this debt, correct?" "Yes," Brenda snapped, her patience evaporating. "Mr. Vance, please explain to him—" "No need, Brenda. I completely understand," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "But there's a slight issue. If you turn to page 3 of the bound report I just handed you, you will see a certified printout from the North Carolina Secretary of State's Business Registration Database. It is time-stamped from yesterday afternoon." In the front row, I heard the crinkle of heavy paper as several neighbors opened their folders. Richard Vance, Esquire, flipped open his copy. His eyes immediately locked onto the page. "What is this garbage?" Brenda hissed, finally flipping the plastic cover open. "It's not garbage, Brenda. It's public record," I said, my voice steady, projecting to the back of the room. "Now, I'm sure Mr. Vance here is well aware of the Non-Profit Corporation Act of North Carolina. Back in the late 80s, when this neighborhood was built, a lot of corporate charters were filed with a specific sunset clause, a 30-year expiration date. If the board of directors doesn't proactively hold a vote, draft a resolution, and file articles of amendment with the state to renew the charter before those 30 years expire, the corporation legally ceases to exist." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a second. Richard Vance had stopped reading. He was staring at the paper, his mouth slightly open. The amused smirk was completely gone. "The Oak Creek Homeowners Association was incorporated on October 20, 1988, I continued, my voice ringing clear across the stale air of the clubhouse. "Which means the charter expired on October 20, 2018. If you look at the status line on that state document, Brenda, right under your name as the registered agent, you will see the words, 'administratively dissolved.'" Brenda was staring at the page. Her eyes were darting back and forth. "This is a mistake. This is a typo." "It's not a typo," I said. "For the last 5 years, Brenda, you have been operating a phantom entity. The Oak Creek HOA does not legally exist. It has no corporate standing. It cannot enter into contracts. It cannot hire landscaping crews. It cannot retain expensive legal counsel. I looked directly at the lawyer. And it certainly cannot levy fines, enforce architectural guidelines, or place a lien on my property. The room was starting to shift. The quiet murmuring was returning, but it wasn't directed at me anymore. It was a confused, escalating buzz directed at the front table. "This is ridiculous!" Brenda yelled, her voice cracking slightly, abandoning the microphone. She turned to the lawyer. "Richard, tell him this is ridiculous. Tell him he has to pay." Richard Vance didn't look at her. He was currently flipping frantically through the rest of the dossier. I had included everything. The original covenants highlighting the corporate requirement clause, the state statutes on administrative dissolution, and a rather colorful printout of the penal code regarding fraudulent collection of a debt. "So, Brenda," I said, raising my voice over the growing noise of the crowd. "Back to my original question. If I write this check for $15,500 to an entity that the state of North Carolina says does not exist, where does that money go? Are you just depositing it into a personal, unregulated slush fund account? Because I'm not a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure the IRS and the district attorney's office refer to that as embezzlement." Chaos. Absolute, unmitigated, glorious chaos erupted in the room. The word embezzlement was the match in the powder keg. The 30 nosy neighbors who had spent the last 5 years dutifully writing checks for $800 in annual dues suddenly did the math. A guy in the third row, a large man wearing a Carolina Panthers jersey, stood up and pointed a thick finger at the board table. "Wait a minute. I paid a $1,200 special assessment last year for the pool pump. Who the hell did I write that check to if the HOA is dead? I got fined $300 for leaving my trash cans out in 2021, a woman yelled from the back. "Did you steal my money, Brenda?" "Order! Order in this meeting!" Brenda shrieked, banging the wooden gavel on the table so hard I thought it was going to shatter. "This man is lying. He is a disgruntled homeowner trying to distract from his non-compliant roof. Richard, do something." Richard Vance, Esquire, finally moved. He slowly closed the heavy black folder. He carefully placed it into his expensive leather briefcase. He closed the clasps with 2 distinct metallic clicks. He stood up, adjusted his silk tie, and looked at Brenda. "Ms. Redacted," Vance said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "My firm was retained by the Oak Creek Homeowners Association, Inc., with the explicit understanding that the client was a valid, active corporate entity. Given the documentation provided here, which I will need to independently verify, but appears to be authentic state records, I cannot represent you in this matter. In fact, if this board has been collecting assessments and executing contracts under the guise of a dissolved corporation, my firm cannot have any association with you whatsoever." Brenda's jaw physically dropped. "You can't leave. You are our lawyer. We paid you a $5,000 retainer." "You paid the retainer from an account that shouldn't legally exist," Vance said smoothly, picking up his briefcase. "I will hold those funds in escrow pending a legal determination of their ownership. Furthermore, I strongly advise this board to immediately cease all operations, freeze all bank accounts, and retain criminal defense counsel. Good evening." He didn't even look at me. He just walked down the side aisle, pushed through the double glass doors, and disappeared into the humid North Carolina night. The room exploded. 30 people were on their feet, all shouting at once. The hypervigilant board member, Susan, was actually crying, her head in her hands, repeating, "Oh my God, I'm an accessory to fraud. I'm an accessory to fraud," over and over again. Cary, the sleepy guy, had finally woken up and looked absolutely terrified. And Brenda just stood there. The gavel hung limply in her hand. Her perfect helmet of hair seemed to deflate slightly. Her face had drained of all color, replacing her usual aggressive flush with a sickly pale gray. She looked at the projector screen, which was still displaying the $15,000 fine for my Sahara beige roof. Then she looked at the heavy black folder in front of her. She looked up at me. There was no anger left in her eyes, just profound, paralyzing panic. What did you do, Jake?" she whispered into the screechy microphone. "I fixed my roof, Brenda," I said, picking up my empty chair and folding it with a loud metallic clatter. "And I guess I fixed the neighborhood too. You have a nice night." I didn't stick around to watch the rest of the bloodbath. I turned around and walked up the center aisle, parting the sea of angry neighbors who were now physically advancing on the folding table, demanding bank statements and refunds. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the muggy night air. The crickets were chirping. The pool water was glowing a soft blue in the dark. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the smell of chlorine and impending freedom. I walked the 3 blocks back to my house. I didn't rush. I just took my time, enjoying the absolute silence of the suburban streets. When I got to my driveway, I stopped and looked up. The moon was out, casting a soft, silver light over the neighborhood. I looked at my house. The hot pink fine and the yellow escalation notice were still taped to my front door. I walked up the steps, peeled them both off the glass, crumpled them into a tight little ball, and tossed them into the recycling bin. Then I stepped back onto the lawn and looked up at my roof. Honestly, the Sahara beige looked absolutely spectacular in the moonlight. The fallout the next morning was something straight out of a beautiful, chaotic dream. I woke up at 8 a.m., made a pot of coffee, and sat on my front porch, just watching the neighborhood. It was like the fall of the Berlin Wall, but with lawn ornaments. By 9 a.m., the guy 3 houses down had dragged a massive, rusted boat on a trailer out from behind his fence and parked it proudly in his driveway. By 10 a.m., a woman across the street was actively painting her front door a vibrant neon teal. It was glorious. The invisible cage had been lifted. The tyranny of the aesthetic harmony was dead. Of course, Brenda didn't go quietly into the night. Later that afternoon, a hastily typed, frantic flyer was stuffed into everyone's mailbox. It was a plea from concerned citizens, which was obviously just Brenda, begging the neighborhood to hold an emergency vote to reincorporate the HOA, citing the immediate collapse of society and property values without oversight. She needed a 75% majority vote from the homeowners to file the reinstatement paperwork with the state. They held the vote the following Tuesday in the cul-de-sac. It wasn't even close. Out of 120 homes, exactly 3 people voted in favor of bringing the HOA back. The motion was defeated so spectacularly that people actually cheered. The Oak Creek Homeowners Association was officially, permanently dead. But I wasn't quite done, because while the HOA was dead, they still had a bank account sitting in legal limbo, filled with 5 years of improperly collected dues. I sat down at my laptop and drafted one final letter. It wasn't a demand letter from a fancy law firm, but it carried just as much weight. I formally demanded a full refund of my $800 annual dues for the current year, citing fraudulent collection by a non-existent corporate entity. I noted that if a check was not in my mailbox within 5 business days, my next call would be to the North Carolina Attorney General's office to report a massive, multi-year wire fraud operation being run out of Brenda's living room. 3 days later, a plain white envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a cashier's check for $800, drawn from the remaining slush fund. There was no note, no apology, just the money. They paid me just to make me go away. I took the check down to the bank, deposited it, and drove straight to the comic book store. I used the money to buy a graded, pristine copy of Amazing Spider-Man number 300. I figured it was a fitting trophy. It's been 6 months now. The neighborhood hasn't descended into anarchy. Property values haven't plummeted. Sure, the grass gets a little long sometimes, and there are a few more boats in driveways than there used to be, but people are actually talking to each other again. Without the constant threat of fines and clipboard-wielding tyrants, it just feels like a normal place to live. As for Brenda, I still see her sometimes. She still drives her pristine white Lexus, but she doesn't carry the clipboard anymore. She doesn't patrol the streets looking for infractions. Whenever I am out walking Barnaby the cat on a leash, which, by the way, was totally illegal under the old covenants, and Brenda drives by, she refuses to make eye contact. She just stares straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turn white. And every time she drives past my house, I know she has to look at it. She has to look at that beautiful, perfectly installed, completely non-compliant roof. Because sometimes, the best defense isn't just knowing the rules. It's knowing that the people trying to enforce them forgot to follow their own.